What's up, everyone? So, Terastallization has been banned in the Monotype format. So, before I discuss my thoughts on it, let's go through the reasonings the council had. So, it has been unanimously banned by the council, which honestly surprised me. I thought maybe one or two people wouldn't agree with the ban, so that did definitely come as a little surprise. But being able to transform into a single type to remove weaknesses is incredible defensively, and with a massive power creep, this allows for too many Pokemon to freely snowball through teams. Adding to this, Terastal boost Pokemon boost from 1.5 times stab to 2 times stab, making it nearly impossible for disadvantageous matchups to gain a footing in a game, forget even winning one. Every mon can use the crystal, and the type changes the 2 by stab remain even after being switched out. The power creep across the generation is absurd, and Terra further exasperates the problem, so we are getting rid of it. So that is the council's justification for the ban. Now, my thoughts are somewhat mixed. I'm not saying I completely agree or disagree with the council, but I want to discuss mine first of all. So, kind of the first on the list was Terastallization was very fun to use. I really, really enjoyed it. I think it added a very interesting dynamic to the tier that we haven't seen in previous generations. And for that reason, I think it was definitely too soon to ban the mechanic, in my opinion. I think it would have been fun to use it for at least a few more weeks, especially considering things like Dynamax lasted a long time or longer time in the meta than things like Terastallizing did, and I don't think it's nearly as broken as Dynamax was. As well as that, I think it added very interestingly defensive mechanics to the tier. Most people obviously focus on the offensive, which for me is kind of a drawback to it because I think the offensive was a little broken, but we'll get into that in a while. But I think defensively, it added again a really interesting dynamic to the tier. For example, if you had maybe an Iron Hands on a mono fighting team and suddenly your opponent is spamming Earthquake, hitting Terastallization would remove the Iron Hands' electric type to become pure fighting, and then you could potentially live the Earthquake. I think defensive plays like that were very interesting and really, really added something to the tier. On top of that, another reason I liked it is because absolutely every type could make use of this. It's not something that's only top tiers, for example, can use. Is it only something top tiers can abuse? Not so much either. But every type has the ability to terastallize on every Pokemon. This is both a pro and a con because, of course, there's going to be some insanely powerful Pokemon who can abuse this, but I think a lot of weaker Pokemon like this too. I think Low-Kicks is a good example. With Bug Terastallized boosted tinted lens first impression, it was really tearing through a lot of teams, which is super cool because Bug is traditionally not always a fantastic type in Monotype. So with that said, I think some weaker types actually really enjoyed it defensively and offensively, so it was nice to see said weaker types get some kind of new tools to shine. However, I don't think overall that really would have lasted because the top tiers would have still probably dominated more with it. Another reason I don't think it was necessarily broken was because we actually knew the type going in. If you see your opponent's team, you know exactly if they're going to be, what type they're going to be. If they're running a mono ice team, the Pokemon has to be terastallized into ice. For example, if Chien Pao, the ice dark Pokemon, was on a mono ice team, its terastallized type was guaranteed to be ice. If it was on a dark team, it was guaranteed to be dark. So there was no surprise immunities. You weren't throwing a ghost move at a ghost Pokemon that suddenly became normal and became immune. It wasn't like that. We knew the type, so for that reason, I think there was definitely a lot of the surprise element was taken away, which I liked, and I think it made it a bit more balanced. It's just like a super boost to your monotype, which I also think definitely thematically fits. I also think some of the big abusers of the mechanic are broken mons, not necessarily the mechanic. Things that come to mind are Fluttermane, Palafin, for example. Those two Pokemon now have been banned since the Terastallize has been banned, but I think those should have been looked at first before we ban Terastallization and see is it still actually a broken mechanic. So this is kind of a neutral argument. The argument that types lose something. Sorry, the argument that types cannot potentially win against disadvantageous matchups is something I'm kind of on the fence about because types lose to monotypes anyway a lot of the time. For example, Swords Dance Caesar, it's very hard for an ice or fairy team to potentially counter that. And with that in mind, I think the onus is on the fairy slash ice player to try and build around something like Caesar. So for that reason, I would have liked to see, would given time, would players be able to build around their weakness to Terastallization, and was it banned too soon? So this is kind of a neutral argument. I can completely understand why, but I also think that maybe it was potential that we could have built around it. So my arguments against Terastallization and why I think it's good that it's banned are, of course, the first one being it allowed some types to become completely dominant. Right now in the early meta, Water, Ghost, Dark, Fairy, and Fighting are pretty much the only 5 types I ever see right now in the higher end of the ladder, which is extremely boring. There's 18 types. I would like to see more, and I'm not necessarily saying this is entirely because of Terastallization, but they definitely make strong use of Terastallization, so that is something to watch out for. And the other big argument against it is it would mean some mons that aren't necessarily ban-worthy would, I think, be ban-worthy. And I think the big thing that comes to mind is Dragapult or any other Pokemon that don't necessarily have good stab, and that's what's holding them back. So on a Ghost team, Terastallized Dragapult could suddenly abuse physical Ghost Stab very easily and very, very effectively thanks to Terra Blast. So I do think ultimately that might have led that Dragapult to have been banned. So I can understand for that reason why it's also important for Terastallized to be banned. So with that in mind, I do not intend to change it. I can't or no do intend to try change the council's decision because ultimately it is their decision and I will enjoy the format regardless. However, I do think ultimately I would have liked to see it last a little more time just so I could potentially make videos with it or even have just enjoyed it for a little longer while it was still fresh and fun. So with that in mind, definitely let me down below in the comments section your opinion on Terastallization. I know it's definitely a hot topic of discussion right now across many formats, and I did see quite a lot of backlash over this being banned so soon, but there are definitely people who think this is a very good ban too, so let me know down below. And if you like this video, definitely like and subscribe. It helps me grow a lot of the channel. I know it's really annoying to hear YouTubers say that over and over again, but it does make a difference. And we're going to push for 1k subs right now for Generation 9. So I appreciate you all. Take care and have a good day.